Here's a weird thought my brain had today, and I'm not sure what to do with it. I've noticed that people like to abbreviate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's name to AOC. I get it when it's being used as a hashtag, hashtag AOC, but used otherwise it feels a little lazy. I don't want to say it's racist to abbreviate her name, but it feels like it might be approaching racism maybe. My reasoning for this is that I feel like we shorten her name to spare us the difficulty of typing out her non-Anglo name, and by doing so we're sort of removing her minority status in a way. Then again, maybe I'm overthinking all of this, and it's perfectly fine to abbreviate her name. Is it racist? Is it racist but still Is it not racist but still unacceptable? Is it perfectly fine and my brain is just weird?
Is it not racist but still unacceptable is the question? Yeah. So what's the basis of it being unacceptable? You just don't like acronyms?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter anyway, because from now on I'm calling her Occasional Cortex. So.
Hello again. This is Grokking Points. We are the radical centrist's guide to new media and the modern culture war.
And we are your radical centrists, Alex and Travis.
How's it going, Alex?
It's going pretty good. I still have a fatty headache, but I'm just going to get over that.
We'll power through
it. Yeah, if I sound like I have no idea what's going on, I'll blame that on the headache instead of actually not having any idea.
Okay. So Joe Rogan's had a really busy week. It's been a pretty busy week in general. We've got a lot of stuff to get through. So Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, was on Joe Rogan. What did you think of that episode? He was also on Sam Harris, so we can talk about that. But yeah, kind of covered the same stuff.
He's been going on. I guess I actually didn't check. Do you know, has he made any media appearances? Like, is he interviewed by any mainstream outlets, or is it just a podcast?
I mean, not that I've seen.
Okay. I mean, it seems like it's a thing, right? Where sometimes people will just go on a podcast tour, exactly, and then hit all the major platforms. I don't know if he had a plan going into this, or if he's like trying to promote a specific message or something. I mean, obviously he went on both of these podcasts for a reason.
I mean, he definitely seemed like he had some pretty prepared talking points.
Right. I mean, okay, so the larger conversation here, of course, is Twitter is a platform that a lot of people use. You know, some people use it for just memes and stuff, but a lot of people follow politics. And then especially, in the intellectual dark web, all of those guys have Twitter accounts and are fairly active. Joe Rogan and Sam Harris in particular are pretty active and have a network there. And so there's been concern for a while on Twitter about, from the right, there's a concern about Twitter censoring conservatives and like banning conservatives or deleting or censoring more conservative messages. And then on the left, there's a concern about like alt-right trolls taking over Twitter.
Yeah.
And
Twitter's not banning enough people.
Yeah, exactly. Or Jack is like somehow standing for alt-right trolls. Or enabling this sort of stuff to happen. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's even just implicit through algorithms. And so this is kind of what Jack talked about on Joe Rogan and Sam Harris's show, but it was strange. If you listen to it, he is very, on the one hand, he brings up these criticisms of Twitter and sort of the pros and cons and the trade-offs they try to make within Twitter, and like how they deal with trolls or how they deal with censorship, and what's the line between an algorithm versus a human decision, and how they enforce terms of service. So there's these various issues that Jack has to balance, or that Twitter has to balance. And he does talk about that stuff, but it's also like he tries to be as vague as possible about all of these things.
He's got some really good politician type responses to a lot of these questions. Sam Harris used the word pirouette.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty good description of
pirouetting around the issues.
Yeah. Joe Rogan got a whole bunch of flack for not, I guess, drilling down hard enough on Jack, which was confusing to me after listening to the Harris episode, because Harris didn't get much out of him either. So it's really kind of depressing to me to watch Joe Rogan apologize to his next few guests about this interview and keep apologizing to his fans and all this, when like Jack is just a really hard dude to talk to. Like it's really hard to get anything out of him. For the more egregious things, he pretty much just owns it and says, yep, that's a problem. We have some issues. We're working to fix it. And that's kind of where the conversation ends.
Right. Yeah, I think, obviously there's there's a human element to this where if you're Joe Rogan, you're in a room. Well, first of all, Joe Rogan has a crazy program where he has somebody on every day and they talk for like 3 hours. And many times this is the first time that he's met this person. And they somehow just have like a perfectly fluid conversation. So that, first of all, that's amazing that Rogan can do that. But then, of course, that also means that when Jack comes into the room and sits down to record with Rogan, Rogan is seeing him face to face. He's a human. Jack comes off as very cordial, very self-aware and polite, and they're kind of just having a conversation. So in that space, in the physical room where Rogan and Jack are, they're like two guys that are just talking and trying to figure something out. From the perspective of us, the listeners, and especially people who are often super heavily on Twitter, you know, a lot of these people, well, us included, but a lot of his listeners are, some of them lean more conservative. A lot of them are maybe in the front lines of the culture war. Like they're on Twitter, they're on these platforms. You know, maybe they feel like they've been censored or they can't say certain things. And then Joe Rogan, because he has this huge platform, he's their advocate. He's like their champion. And Jack is sort of like this elusive mastermind behind the scenes of Twitter. And I mean, obviously he is, I don't know if he's a billionaire, but if he's not, he's close. He's obviously very wealthy. And he has a lot of power. So their expectation as a listener is Rogan is going to like stand up to the baddie and he's going to question him and sort of force more information out of him. Like, why are you banning conservatives? What exactly is your policies? How are you going to enforce these fairly? And then Rogan is seeing this guy as a human being, which he is. I mean, this is a complicated situation. He's also a human being with a huge amount of power, billions of dollars, control over this platform. And it's, you know, to your point, yeah, some of these issues are complicated and it's not clear how to address them, but it's not very satisfying for the CEO of this company to say, yeah, I don't know what our terms should be. You know, I don't know how to enforce them. It's just hard. It's like, yeah, of course it's hard. You're the CEO. That's, you know, this is your job. No one else is going to figure this out if you're not going to figure it out. We're reasonably expecting you, if you're going to come onto this podcast and talk to us, the people, about this, you're going to have some answer. And I think that's what everyone wanted really was I don't think they were really upset at Rogan. They were just projecting their frustration that there wasn't an answer to these questions. Like they expected, oh, Jack's going to come on, like Rogan's going to, you know, challenge him and we're going to finally get some answers. And they ended it with like nothing to take away. And same with the Harris interview as well.
I agree.
Can we maybe give like a specific example, like a person who was banned or like if someone's not on Twitter, what are we even talking about? Why do we care? Yeah,
well, the one that keeps getting brought up that I've seen is, who is it? Megan Murphy.
Megan Murphy, yeah.
She got banned for saying men aren't women. And
men aren't women, though.
Yeah, and Rogan talked about this with a few guests recently. Every time Rogan brought up these specific cases, Jack kind of just said, well, you know, I don't know the details to those specific cases. And okay, like, fair enough. But like that's where the question is, right? Like, it's really hard to figure out exactly where the line is if we don't talk about these specific cases. I don't really know what the context was of this men aren't women thing, but the assertion, I guess, is that is a form of harassment if directed at a specific person. So we just don't really know whether the line is, you can't, like, the line is like, okay, this thought police thing where you put this idea out and that idea is non grata. You can't have that idea on Twitter. You get banned for having that idea. Or is it you're directing this idea at a person or at like a specific group?
Right.
Are you expressing an idea or are you harassing that person or group?
Right. And I think that a lot of the so just to give another couple of examples here, basically what's been going on Twitter is Twitter's a huge platform. A lot of people use it. You can't have a manual person like reading everybody's tweets and figuring out what's okay or what's not okay. And so they've got, you know, machine learning algorithms. They have sort of reporting systems. And then the idea is if somebody is either, you know, posting something that's hateful or is like harassing a user, that's going to show up in either user reports or data that like the algorithms are analyzing and figuring out, okay, you know, maybe there's like a bot swarm over here that's all trying to spam a certain offensive word or hashtag or something, or maybe there's a few users that are targeting a specific user with, some harassment campaign. And maybe comments like men aren't women, maybe that's just a statement of opinion or fact, or maybe it's a pattern of abusive behavior where somebody keeps like finding trans accounts and trying to, push them off the platform with their hate or something.
Yeah, so that was one of Jack's points, is that he didn't really comment on that specific case, but he said that if that happened, then there was probably more going on. Like maybe that person was saying like this is a pattern of behavior with this user where they keep directing these tweets at a specific person or group. That was kind of the last straw there.
And so examples of, just so that you kind of know who we're talking about, no one really knows Megan Murphy. I think she was a not well-known person before she got banned. But in the past, notable people who've gotten banned were, I believe Sargon was banned like twice, like banned and then I guess let back on and then banned again. So Sargon of Akkad, who was recently known for being banned from Patreon as well. Then Milo Yiannopoulos was banned. Or what is it called? On Twitter, they say your account has been suspended, but basically that means banned. Back in the good old days, Martin Shkreli got banned. Pretty sure he was actually harassing people, but anyway. Oh, and then Alex Jones was banned famously. I mean, he was banned from.
There's a pretty big list of them. Like if you go to I think it's on Wikipedia. You can go to like the list of people who have been banned from Twitter. They're literally all conservatives too.
Right. Well, yeah, and so this is the contention, right? Is that it's not just that they have these terms about harassment that they're, neutrally enforcing. The contention is there's a political motive behind it and that they're specifically banning conservative people. And so I guess you could interpret that either as a conscious decision by the leadership or by the policy enforcement people, or you could say, okay, maybe no one intended it, but this is what's happening as a result of their reporting infrastructure or algorithms or whatever. But either way, as a user, if you're conservative, a lot of people feel like they can't say what they want to say, or that the people that they support are, being deplatformed. And then now the control of the platform is increasingly progressive or liberal. And that matters. Like, the information is powerful, networks are powerful. And if you remove certain voices from the platform, or if certain messages are bumped up by the algorithm over others, then of course more people are going to see those and those are going to be more influential. So I totally get the concern from a conservative standpoint. No one that I care about has really been banned because I don't really like Sargon or Milo or Alex Jones that much, but those are big names and a lot of people follow those people. And so, there's a reasonable concern that like over time, less and less extreme people will get banned for more and more trivial comments. And the men are not women one is a recent example. And then also like a week ago, there was a phenomenon where BuzzFeed and what was the other one? Washington Post or Huffington Post? One of the posts, both of them had big layoffs and had to fire a lot of their journalists. And conservatives were kind of making fun of them because there's these super left-leaning progressive outlets who are known for posting like a lot of clickbait articles. And so people were tweeting at them like, oh, well, sorry you got fired, but you should learn to code. Or like you should learn like a better skill that'll be safer in the market.
And this was a callback to some articles that were written by these same outlets about coal miners and manufacturing blue collar people who are out of work in the Midwest, how they should learn to code or how they are learning to code. I think there was a misconception where the idea was that there was a whole bunch of these like vicious left-wing articles saying like, why don't the blue collar workers just learn to code? They should just do that. They're such whiners. Like if you look at the headlines, that's not really how the articles were laid out. It was kind of like stories about like feel-good stories about these miners and manufacturers transitioning to a different type of work.
Right. I think part of the narrative was this was maybe around 2016 or 17 where Trump had won the election, and part of his platform or part of his appeal was like, I represent working class people and I'm going to, and especially in America, I'm going to help protect your jobs, your like manufacturing or energy jobs from, sort of globalist interference or outsourcing or automation or technological change in some way. And so the sell there was, you don't have to, learn anything new. You don't have to adapt to the new economy. I'm just going to protect your jobs. We will impose some tariffs and stuff, and you guys are going to be okay. And the left wing response was, we got to upgrade our economy for the future. We need to teach people to code or give people better skills. That's the right response. And so that was being parodied now, where the BuzzFeed writers are getting fired. The market incentives seem to not, it's not a great market for advertising and media right now. These outlets don't really know how to make money. And the only way they've been able to do it in the past few years is through clickbait, like BuzzFeed and like Huffington Post. And a lot of outlets are suffering from this. But yeah, so the idea of tweeting out learn to code is sort of commenting on this, like, hey, like, sorry, but well, first of all, I don't like you because you post shit about conservatives all the time. And second of all, if you want to have a secure job, you have to learn a more useful skill or like adapt to the new economy. So learn to code. But anyway, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because that is what was happening more recently, like in the last couple of weeks. This meme took off where a bunch of conservatives were tweeting at like beleaguered BuzzFeed writers who are, tend to be active on Twitter. And now those people tweeting learn to code were getting banned. Yeah. And then at a certain point, it was clear that there was actually, this wasn't even a manual review thing. There was some automated process that was banning or suspending these people because, somebody tested it out where they just like had no history of like harassment or abuse. And they just like created a new account or had a fairly inactive account. They tweeted someone learned to code and then they got suspended. Yeah. Like automatically. Now, on the one hand, you could say, okay, maybe that is annoying or that's harassment in some way. But on the other hand, it's clearly not violent. Yeah. It's not like doxing, and it's more or less just a meme. Like maybe the meme is trying to be used to, make fun of somebody or mock somebody. Yeah. But certainly people on the left do this all the time, and people on Twitter in general do it all the time.
Yeah, and it's not even making fun of somebody on like the basis of some immutable characteristics. It's right. Yeah, it's like learn to code.
Right. It's not like show me them titties or like get off of Twitter, Jews or something. So it's okay. So it's reasonable enough to say that a bunch of people are getting suspended for telling BuzzFeed writers to learn to code on Twitter. And yet just 2 weeks ago, there was literally high tier Hollywood celebrities calling for physical attacks on children after the Covington high school thing. And those accounts are totally fine. They weren't even given like a warning or something, or like a soft, like temporary suspension. They were just, oh no, it's totally fine for Kathy Griffin to say, I want the names of these kids and where they live.
In her megaphone to her million followers or whatever.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Rogan has promised to have Jack back on to talk about some of these specific instances. So maybe we can revisit this when that actually happens and we have more information about Twitter's actual goals and opinions are on some of these things. Mm-hmm. Speaking of Rogan, though, do you want to move on to the other show that he had this week?
Yeah, with Tim Pool. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Let's bring it up real quick because I want to watch. One of the parts I'm interested in is in like the first five minutes or so.
So before we do this, who is Tim Pool? I don't think this guy is super well known.
He used to work at Vice. And now he's kind of an independent YouTube journalist where he talks a lot about kind of the stuff that we're interested in, this culture war stuff, what's happening on Twitter and...
Well, specifically censorship of conservatives, right? Yeah. He's like a specialist in that?
Yeah. He talks about TERFs.
Okay, so that's the part.
Yeah, okay, so Megan Murphy, please explain it. She was a feminist. She said...
She's called a trans exclusionary. I understand this is offensive. I guess calling someone a trans exclusionary radical feminist, I'm assuming.
Why is that offensive?
It's just used in an offensive way, I suppose.
To her? Offensive?
Against people like her, yeah. So there's intersectional feminists. Right. They tend to be trans inclusive, meaning that they believe that someone who's born biologically male can compete with those biologically female if they transition, if they take hormones and things like that.
Can compete,
right? Like powerlifting, racing, biking and stuff.
Yeah, that's where I step in.
Okay, so let's stop it there. After watching this whole thing, I like Tim Pool. He's a pretty reasonable, not edgy public figure in this space. But this is crazy. This like trans exclusionary radical feminist thing being an offensive term. I don't know how this happened.
You mean offensive to the people that are called this? Like it's a derogatory term.
Yeah. I don't know what they would prefer to be called. I guess like gender critical is their preferred nomenclature.
Right.
But it's like saying you calling me, like if I'm pro-life, you calling me anti-choice is like an offensive thing. Right, like it's a way of framing a conversation such that my views are framed in the worst possible light. But that can't be like an offensive thing to call somebody. The feminists, the radical feminists who are known as TERFs they're literally trans exclusive radical feminists. Like that, there's no more accurate descriptive way to lay out their beliefs. They're radical feminists who do not think that trans people are a part of their movement or are women.
Right. Trans women in particular. Right?
Yeah. Like, I don't know. It just feels like Tim here is like really bending the knee to some audience that he feels like maybe tribally attached to or something. You know, I don't want to put ideas in his own head, but that's what it feels like to me. It really feels like kowtowing.
I mean, I see what is going on. Like, I think where Tim is coming from is that, okay, so say you went just in the past like 10 years, and in 10 years in the past, trans issues were not really mainstream, or people weren't really thinking about them. And I think for the most part, feminists would have thought about themselves as, assume that no trans people ever exist, and they're just promoting women's rights as they understand women to be, right? And would not include trans women sort of implicitly, because they're not even like in the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe this isn't 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, whatever it is. From that perspective, you would probably not want to call, you might say it would be offensive to call a feminist like a man hater. Instead of just saying feminist. It's like, well, yeah, but they're just feminists. So like, if you call them man haters, that's kind of being, I wouldn't call it offensive, but it's deriding the thing that they care about, right?
Yeah.
So I'm on the same side as you, where like I have no problem calling somebody a social justice warrior if what they say is like, we want to fight for social justice. It's like, okay, you're a social justice warrior. Yeah. Like, you can say that's offensive or not, but that's like, yeah, that's a description of what you are. But if you view feminists like 20 years ago, if you view feminist as like a group of lower social status or like power, then you could view that as punching down to be deriding that group, in the same way as like you wouldn't necessarily call gay people, you wouldn't call like LGBTQ activists the gays. Yeah. Even though that may be, a technically accurate term of describing them, right? So I think that's kind of what he's getting at. Anyway, maybe we're getting distracted.
Well,
but
I thought it was an interesting thing to bring up, just because like there are problems with this word TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminist. It's certainly it's almost like Nazi nowadays. Jesse Singal is called a TERF. ContraPoints is called a TERF because of some of her views. Like, to some people, if you don't...
ContraPoints is a TERF?
To some people, yes.
That doesn't make any sense.
I know. ContraPoints has some turfy views.
So if you don't know,
in some circles,
ContraPoints is a popular YouTuber who is a trans woman.
Yeah, she's probably the most prominent trans YouTuber, besides Blair White, who doesn't exist anymore.
What does that mean?
She's just gone. I don't think she's in politics anymore.
Oh, but doesn't she still have a YouTube channel?
I don't know. I haven't followed her because she's not in politics.
Okay.
Like, it seems to be that if you don't believe anyone who says they are a woman is in fact a woman, you're a TERF.
Right.
So like there's some problems here that we have to work out. But like, taking the fact that people call TERFs, there are people calling people TERFs who aren't TERFs. That doesn't mean TERF is an offensive term. And just because people shut down your argument by calling you a TERF, it doesn't make an offensive term.
Right.
Like, if somebody doesn't want to engage with you because of your gender critical views, whether or not they call you a TERF, I don't think it really makes a difference in that conversation.
Yeah, I have no problem referring to people as TERFs either. And I would probably agree with TERFs more often than not, even if I wouldn't call... Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't want to come down too hard on Tim here. I want to skip forward to like 30 minutes or so and talk about something else that he brings up. But I want to make it clear that any criticism we bring here is with a grain of salt, because going on Joe Rogan's podcast and talking to him live for like 2 or 3 hours is so hard to do without putting your foot in your mouth like a million different times.
Well, and Tim is he is this combination of like really, really fast speaking. And I would say he's even faster than Ben Shapiro. I had to like slow down my podcast because I couldn't follow him. But he's also super careful with his words. Like there's many times where he's like, I'm not totally sure about the facts, so don't quote me on this, but here's what I think happened. He's a pretty responsible journalist in that regard. And I'm pretty sure every time he said that, he then said something that was completely factually accurate anyway. Mm-hmm. He was just careful. Yeah. He was still overly careful.
So let's go to 36 minutes. I want to talk about this just because it relates to our last topic.
So let me talk about why I think what we're seeing with Twitter might be one of the biggest problems ever. Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, these platforms, are where we exist socially, politically. It's where our ideas are exchanged. It's where we learn about who we're going to vote for or why we won't vote for somebody. When you ban somebody, you exile them. They're no longer a part of that conversation. So they're very much so told you are outside the city walls, right? You can't come in, you can't talk to us, and there's nothing you can do about it. But then when you realize the rules are actually bent, they're slanted in a certain direction, you can then predict where things are going.
He's making an adjacent point to what we were just talking about. When you're removed from Twitter or one of these platforms, you're almost removed from society. So I want to talk about how kind of valid that idea is, because I've been thinking about this same thing. My inner struggle with this is that it feels like it's a little too online of an argument to make. Like, we joked about this an episode or two ago. Like, is Twitter just the real world? Like, is this all bullshit and Twitter is like where everything actually happens?
Right. We're in the Matrix and Twitter is like Zion.
Yeah. So I don't know how to think about this. How valid is it a point to make that if someone's banned from one or two platforms, they really are just removed from the culture?
Well, it's a valid point. Whether or not that's what we want the world to be like is a good question. But I mean, it's unavoidable fact that social media is shaping the cultural landscape.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just, I mean, there's a very real sense of like, okay, if you want to, there's a lot of people right now that feel like they're too online, they're too sucked into social media, and they'd like to, delete Facebook, hit the gym, maybe figure out how to, get their family back together or make their relationships more fulfilling and sort of get back in touch with the quote real world. And so a lot of people are doing that, and people are trying to leave these platforms. But on the other hand, there's also this phenomenon where people who have an inordinate amount of influence on these platforms, they get a few things happen. They get very, very wealthy quickly. It's usually a small percentage of people, but those small percentage of people gather a large majority of views and engagement, and it's much easier for them to share their ideas. So they get a loudspeaker, so to speak, and it has an outsized influence on both the elite culture, like the people who have the most money and power, and included in that is politics. There's a strong argument that a lot of the most prominent politicians right now are put into their position in part because of their ability to use these social media platforms. So Trump was maybe the first big example of this in 2016, where he didn't have a huge political budget. He didn't have like a lot of canvassers compared to someone like Hillary Clinton, but he had the social media presence. He had Twitter, he had Facebook. This is where the Cambridge Analytica scandal sort of came up about people being able to use that information to influence the election in some way. And then also the allegations of like Russian influence. All of Russia's influence came through the exploitation of social media, if that did anything at all. So, and maybe it didn't, but that's the conversation we're having, right? And then more recently, we've got, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is essentially a superstar right now. And a big part of that is because she can use social media so well. Mm-hmm. And if I had to put my money on it, I would say this is going to be more of a thing going forward than it's going to grow before it stops, right?
Yeah. If only because the generations that aren't using Twitter are slowly dying out.
Yeah. And I think that on the one hand, it is good on maybe an individual basis to take a step back from social media and like get more in touch with your personal life and your community and, break your notification addictions or whatever this is. But if the decisions and the culture and the politics and the power are being driven through these platforms, opting out is only either a temporary or locally optimum strategy. But in the future, I don't see a world where we're not going to have this globally interconnected culture. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of how do we like structure those incentives? How do we, what's the right way to give somebody fame and power? Mm-hmm. It's probably not to give it to like Trump or Jake Paul or Cortez even. But then how do we do it? Like how can you be on Facebook or Twitter and not just get sucked into like an algorithm vortex of dopamine triggers and outrage and all this other stuff? Like how do we actually have this productive conversation? And that is what, that's what Jack says that he wants to do. He says that their team at Twitter is devoted to promoting healthy conversation and like figuring out metrics for that and how to enforce that on like at scale. But it seems like it's not working. At least that's the contention of people like Tim Pool, that as an important part of the conversation, like half the country is essentially being shut out of this new public square.
Yeah, I agree. I think it could be worse, though. I don't know if people like Pool are overstating the problem, but you could imagine a world where this like learn to code type bannings are happening every day, all the time. Or like you could imagine a Twitter CEO who is okay with just banning all libertarian thought in any strain of like, oh, you don't think that the government should be X size or help X people, or just get all of those people off of it. I think Jack is better than what we could have, I guess.
Like Zuckerberg?
Yeah. I mean, he seems at the very least, he's like amenable to having this conversation and trying to work out a solution that most people are at least okay with.
Yeah, I think that if one of the social media platforms is going to figure it out, it's probably going to be Twitter. Mm-hmm. Like they seem that at least they have the, like they're aware of the problem and they're trying to find solutions. And at least, yeah, as of this moment right now, there isn't extremely egregious banning. But I think, you know, the concern that most people have isn't we're currently living in a totalitarian dictatorship. The concern is we're moving in that direction and it's accelerating. Mm-hmm. So whereas a few years ago, like Martin Shkreli getting banned for telling people to suck his dick or something. And for the more extreme examples, we can all kind of agree, okay, they're clearly inconsistently enforced. Like they're clearly not equally enforced against the far left. Mm-hmm. Like the examples, Tim Pool brought up a bunch of examples, but he was saying like Hezbollah and ISIS still have some accounts on Twitter. And, you know, Kathy Griffin she didn't even get a slap on the wrist for publicly calling for the doxing of children, as well as a ton of other people who like blue check marks is what they call them, verified people on Twitter, were just left totally untouched for literally calling for violence on kids, like saying, oh, these kids should all die. We should, you should go punch them in the face if you see them. And then doxing, like spreading their address or like calling for their names or addresses to be spread so they could be harassed. All of that was just like totally untouched by Twitter. And there's other examples that you could easily give of this. It's not symmetrical. And when asked about this, Jack even says something about how they don't want to be neutral about these things. Like they do want to take a stance, whether that stance was political. He didn't comment on, but he said like, oh, we can't afford to be neutral. Like we have to take action or else. And the implication was that like Nazis or white nationalists would take over the country if they.
Yeah. I mean, well, the leftist counter argument to all of that is that the sides aren't symmetrical. The right-wing rhetoric is actually doing more harm than this left-wing, like Kathy Griffith or whatever. I don't know about that. I feel like Kathy Griffith has a much bigger megaphone than probably any Nazi in the world.
Yeah. I don't know. So it's hard to say. And if it was like that's the thing too, is I think from the conservative side, if it was literally just people like Richard Spencer who were actually calling for an ethno-state or something and getting a ton of likes, if that is the thing that's getting banned, I don't think people would be nearly as concerned as compared to someone like Meghan Murphy, who is being banned for not having the, socially optimal position on gender critical theory or something. Mm-hmm. And then going back to that conversation about, or what the quote from Poole here about when people get banned, they're essentially removed from this public square. They're removed from the conversation and like shut outside civil society. That has its own risks in terms of those people still exist in the real world. Yeah. They're still talking to each other. And now they're just forced off this platform and they're even more reinforced with their biases. And, this was the concern about banning Alex Jones from all these platforms. He literally got banned from like 12 social media platforms in the same week. It seemed definitely coordinated in some way. If it wasn't, it's just a strange coincidence that he was banned from like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all in the same week, right? Yeah. And then part of the justification for banning him is that he peddles conspiracy theories about like globalists shutting down conservatives. Yeah. In order to stop that from happening, a bunch of globalists got together to shut him down. Yeah. So it's like, okay, if you bought into that stuff, do you think you're going to be more or less likely to buy into it after he gets banned from every platform, right? That seems to me like there's a concern that it's wrong in the first place to ban them, like that's morally wrong. And there's the concern that it's, even if it was right, it's still going to lead to worse outcomes because now you're just reinforcing these people's conspiratorial beliefs.
Yeah. This is an ongoing conversation. It's really hard to come away with a neat and tidy hot take on what should be done here. So,
were you following? I don't remember exactly when this was. Maybe last May or June or something. But when Mark Zuckerberg went and testified at Congress in response to the Cambridge Analytica stuff, did you watch that?
Not closely.
So he testified in front of the Senate and the House, and they basically asked him questions about Facebook's platform, and were trying to basically get to the bottom of whether Facebook was being either abused by foreign governments in order to influence the election, or whether it was in some way or another damaging to the social fabric of America. One of the big questions I was asked was from Senator Ted Cruz. And so what Cruz asked was, okay, you're Facebook, you're the CEO of this private company, or I guess it's, it's publicly owned now, or it's publicly traded, but it's a private company. And he said, okay, are you a private company with First Amendment rights that can choose whatever they want to publish on the platform and, accept the consequences and the rewards of doing that? Or are you a neutral public forum where the rules around free speech have to be respected? Which one is it? Can't have it both ways. And then Zuckerberg kind of weaseled out of it. And he was just we just want our platform to be as good as it can be. And we just want to encourage conversation. And then Cruz was like, okay, I'm going to ask you again. Are you asserting your First Amendment rights to publish whatever speech or censor whatever speech you want because you're a private company and you can have the terms you want? Or are you a neutral public forum? Which one are you? And he didn't have an answer to the question. And I don't think he was just weaseling out of it. I think he actually has no idea. I think it's too complicated of a question for even the youngest billionaire to answer, or one of the most powerful people in the world to answer. And, if they can't answer these, and I don't think Jack can answer this question either. If they can't answer these questions, who can answer them? Yeah,
I mean, it's a really, we just have these new structures now, where before we had to kind of rely on these old world institutions like the Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and the justice system and the courts. And now we have this whole alternative public forum where the same kinds of things can happen, where you can get persecuted for, your various actions and misfortunes. And we just don't know what to do with it yet. We've decided that there's things that you can do in public where even if the justice system has decided that it can't persecute you, we still don't want you in the public space anymore.
Right.
So we can remove you from the space if you cross some specific boundary or line, like with Me Too, or with these kind of bannings. And so we really need to figure out whether we want to uphold this tradition of free speech, which is protected by the Constitution, but doesn't apply to these online spaces necessarily. We have to decide as a culture in what way we want to interpret those and apply them to our online spaces.
Right. Yeah. And so Sam Harris, when he was interviewing Jack, he kind of brought this up where he said, okay, there's all this question about how do you design your terms of service. Why don't you just, if it's a liability thing, why don't you just leave it up to the law and just say, okay, if the content someone is posting is violating the law, like it's a threat of violence or something, or if it would violate the First Amendment, then you ban it. And then, that shields you from liability if that's what you're doing. And then otherwise, let it up. Why not just, we already have these systems or these ideas or rules in place, these cultural norms. So why don't you just use that as the proxy? And Jack more or less said, no, that's not good enough. We have a responsibility to essentially perform our own form of activism through our company. And he wasn't saying, oh no, that wouldn't, we're a private company and we're trying to maximize our shareholder value. And so we need to protect the platform from trolls. That's not what he was saying. He was saying it's a moral responsibility to go sort of above the law and enact this kind of, I guess you would call it vigilante justice, by which they are removing morally hazardous people from the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the idea that's the fundamental idea that's concerning a lot of people, is that notion of these big tech companies kind of being above the law. And so, we don't have to get together and vote and pass these laws. We don't have to, go through a trial with courts. If we've decided, we meaning the ivory tower people up at, Twitter HQ, if they've decided that TERFs are bad, then they'll just ban them, you know, and then they don't get a voice anymore.
Well, I mean, if he says like that's not good enough, I mean, maybe he's right. It's possible that it isn't good enough to just rely on the justice system to police our internet behavior. Like there's a spectrum of online spaces from fully anonymous and unmoderated all the way to not anonymous and heavily moderated. And, you know, if you want like the most free marketplace of ideas public forum, you can go to 4chan and
hell yeah.
And you know, it's like the most free place in the world. You can post practically whatever you want there without fear of banning on some of the boards, and it's a hellhole. Like like there's some good stuff that about 4chan, but if you're trying to have a productive conversation, it's like, you know, what's the phrase, pissing into an ocean of piss,
right?
Like I think there's a right balance here, and maybe it's just the anonymity that's the problem, but like there are problems with fully unmoderated communities, and they can really ratchet up toxicity. So I believe that we can figure out a way to come up with a moderation system that most people are reasonably happy with. But yeah, obviously Twitter is not in the right place there.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the thing too, is you know, comparing 4chan to Twitter, we're in terms of the, say, 10 years ago pre-social media prominence environment, you know, 4chan's a private company. You know, they run their ads and they're going to make less money if people don't want to go on because it's a hellhole, right? And that's sort of up to them to decide. And similarly with Twitter, you know, they can enforce whatever banning or moderation policies that they want. And if that makes people not want to use the platform, then fine, they'll lose shareholder value or whatever. So that's the one way of thinking about it. And it's only very recently that we're sort of understanding these spaces as being more than just mere private companies exercising their First Amendment, you know, moderation rights on their platform. We're sort of understanding that we have to grapple with that question of to what extent is this a public good? To what extent is the right to like be part of this conversation online? Is that actually some form of rights? Is that something that we want to fight for? Is that something that is okay to cede to these like massive sort of monopolistic tech giants? I think it's an interesting question. I don't think it's, you know, an open and shut case by any means. So I'm not saying that we have to start like regulating Twitter so that doesn't ban conservatives, but it's certainly, you know, it's something that's worth considering. And that's where the culture war is leaning right now. Yeah.
One of the public question, or one of the common questions is whether or not Twitter is like a public utility, whether it's something that we should and can regulate. Like Tim Pool in this podcast we were discussing calls it a monopoly. And it's sort of a monopoly. Like there are alternatives, air quotes, to Twitter, but you know, you can't get quite the same content anywhere else. So yeah, it's a hard thing to really parse.
It is. I mean, and that's another thing that I think our culture is going to have to grapple with is we can't just take these old frameworks like monopoly, which we understood that concept in like the Gilded Age, like 1870 or something, when somebody could own all the steel in the United States. And that's not really what's happening right now. I mean, of course you can be on Facebook, you can be on Instagram, you can be on Twitter, you can be on gab.com, right? There are these other alternatives. The only reason why you can't move from one to another, it's not a scarcity of physical resources, or it's not like a legal protection that these guys have. There's some network value to having, you know, 1 billion people on your platform, and you can't just immediately move those 1 billion people one place or another. And so the monopoly is more in terms of like this like social network majority control.
Yeah, a monopoly of attention, a monopoly of culture, something like that.
Yeah, well, it's hard. We don't really understand how to even talk about it.
Yeah.
And we're still trying to apply these outdated frameworks to it because it's just, I mean, it's only been around for 10 years, right? Like barely. I mean, I've only had my Twitter account for like 8 months and I'm already, fucked in the head. So, so this is going to be an interesting space to follow going forward, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to see how Jack responds to these criticisms and if Twitter can, figure something out.
Yeah, definitely. We will definitely revisit this when he goes on Joe Rogan again.
Yeah. I will say that listeners out there, if you're not on Twitter, or you don't really know that much about what's happening and you're just hearing us like meta commentate about it, I would definitely recommend this episode in particular with Tim Pool, the Joe Rogan Experience number 1242, because I think that gives a really good overview of all the, at least like the conservative criticisms about.
Yeah,
about
they
Twitter.
cover a whole lot.
Yeah. And oh, that's the other thing that's interesting about him is that he is sort of center left leaning liberal, like supported Bernie Sanders, has all of these like progressive policy positions, but he's immediately lumped in with the alt-right because he like is concerned about center right people being censored. So interesting dynamics playing out here.
Okay. What do we have left? Liam Neeson? You want to talk about Liam?
Yeah, we can talk about Liam Neeson's, and I also want to talk about Jeff Bezos.
Okay, so Liam Neeson got into, what would you call it?
Scandal?
Yeah.
This is definitely something you would expect to see in like a tabloid as you walk out the grocery store and be like, that didn't happen. But it did happen.
Yeah. What was the phrase that Sam Harris used to describe the way he told this story?
Oh, it was like
an exceedingly honest and unnecessary disclosure, something like that.
Yeah.
So Liam Neeson was giving this interview to some magazine and like kind of totally unprompted. He talks about this story that happened to him. Some guy raped his friend.
Trigger warning.
Yeah. Content warning. Somebody raped his friend and it turned out to be a black dude. So Liam Neeson goes out every night with a baseball bat looking for somebody to beat up and kill.
Well, by the way, this is when he was young, right?
So so this was back in the 70s.
Yeah, he's reflecting on some story of his troubled past, right?
Yeah. And so I guess he was kind of looking for somebody to escalate into a struggle, and it didn't matter who it was as long as the quote was "black bastard."
I'll tell you a story. This is true. I'm not going to use any names, but I was away and I came back and she told me she had been raped, but she handled the situation of the rape in the most extraordinary way. But my immediate reaction was, I asked, did she know who it was? No. What color were they? She said it was a black person. I went up and down areas with a cosh, hoping I'd be approached by somebody. I'm ashamed to say that. And I did it for maybe a week, hoping some black bastard would come out of a pub and have a go at me about something, so that I could kill him. And it took me a week, maybe a week and a half to kind of go for that. And she said to me, where are you going? I said, I'm just going out for a walk, She said, what's wrong? No, nothing's wrong, fine. And it was horrible when I think back, but I did that. And I've never admitted that to, and I'm saying it to a journalist, God forbid.
Holy shit.
It's awful. But I did learn a lesson from it when I eventually thought, what the fuck are you doing, And I come from a society, I grew up in Northern Ireland in the Troubles, and I knew a couple of guys that died on hunger strike, and I had acquaintances that were very caught up in the Troubles. And I understand that need for revenge, but it just leads to more revenge and more killing and more killing. And, Ireland, Northern Ireland is proof of that, All the stuff that's happening in the world at the minute, the violence is proof of that, So it's, but that's, primal need, I understand,
You can relate to that.
There was a lot of different takes on this. Obviously a lot of people calling him a racist, saying that he shouldn't return to his projects, all the usual things.
Well, his movie, I think he had like a Netflix movie coming up and it got canceled.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Or I don't know exactly what it was, but that was, let's just see. Let's get the story straight. Oh, it's not that the movie was canceled, but there is a red carpet event.
Okay, so an event was canceled that he was supposed to attend
for this new movie called Pursuit coming out.
Okay.
Yeah, so the red carpet premiere was canceled. I don't know if the film itself will be canceled. But.
Yeah. So this was already like pretty well covered by, the usual people that we listen to. Sam Harris and Joe Rogan talked about this, and I think they went over pretty much everything that needs to be said. Like,
I'll summarize that.
Yeah. Well, so the important points are that this should be something you should be able to redeem yourself from. Like, he wasn't bragging about this story. He wasn't saying, like, look what a tough guy I was, or, you know, here's an example of my racism, that kind of thing. Like, it was...
Well, if you watch the video, he's, like, incredibly remorseful. And he's like, I can't believe that I was so blinded by my outrage, and that I can't believe that I would have considered such an act of violence in hindsight.
Yeah.
As I was in a really dark place. Like, he was basically trying to apologize for it.
Yeah, and as Harris pointed out, it's not even racist in the technical sense. Like, he wasn't going after black people because, you know, he heard a story on the news and he has this idea about how all black people are, or, like, you know, he's getting riled up by political tensions and needs to take down the member of some group. It's like this Hatfield and McCoy tribal anger that triggered him into this, like, frenzy.
Right. He was trying to kill a Montague. And he was a Capulet or something, right? So any Montague will do.
Yeah.
So the example that Sam Harris used was, okay, what if his friend was raped by a cop, and then now he has, like, a thing against cops, and then he gets into a fight with a cop? Yeah. And would you say that he was, like, well, obviously not racist, because cops aren't racist.
He was a Chapo Trap House host in that case.
Yeah, exactly. And so Sam's, I don't totally agree with this framing, but Sam's argument is, like, yes, he wanted revenge against a person of this group, but that doesn't necessarily make him racist in the way that we think about it, because he could have projected that anger onto anybody of any group that wronged his friend.
Yeah. Which may or may not be true. Like, we don't know that if it was an English guy or a Scottish guy or a French dude, if he would have gone out and looked for one of those types of people. It's possible that the stark difference in the color of skin is what, like, allowed him to more fully accept this tribal anger.
Yeah.
But it's really beside the point, because it happened in the 70s. And he's obviously a different person now. He's obviously not a danger to either do it again or to encourage other people to do it. He's doing the exact opposite of that. Another thing that was brought up in Rogan's show was there's people that are on the left and are accepted by the left that have done worse things than this. And they've redeemed themselves and are now speaking out against it. And we accept that because we accept that they're a different person now. Right.
So, like, Christian, one of the common narratives is Christian Piccolini is this guy who used to be, he was literally a Nazi. Like, when he was younger, he was part of some sort of, like, roving band of neo-Nazis that would just, like, beat up black people. And he was a kid. He was, like, 18 or 19 or something. And he eventually, like, found his way out of that world. And now he speaks out against neo-Nazis. Mm-hmm. And no one's like, oh, you should, you know, cancel his career and throw him in jail. I mean, not to say it's not like Liam Neeson is an anti-racist activist or something. But clearly he's on, like, this ties in with the conversations around the Virginia governor and stuff as well, which we haven't put on this list. But, like, he got in trouble because it was revealed that in high school or college, or there's a yearbook that he was in where it looked like he was dressed up in blackface next to a guy dressed up in a Klansman outfit.
It's not clear whether he is actually the guy in a blackface or the guy in the Klan outfit.
Right. Or if he's even one of them, which he's now since denied, but he said originally.
It's got his name on the page right next to the photo.
Right.
So it's presumed that he is one of them, but it's not clear which he would rather be.
Yeah. He's like, oh shit, which one do I say that I am? I'm the lamp. I was the lamp in the background.
It was actually a ghost.
I was a wallpaper. Anyway, so but it's an interesting question. Like, and then this also even ties into the discussion about Brett Kavanaugh from months ago, which is to what extent can a person redeem themselves from something that they did 30 years ago, 40 years ago?
Yeah.
Like, would it have been better for him to not say anything?
Well, I mean,
and just not even try and, like, express his remorse?
Yes, I think probably it would be better if he didn't say anything.
Well, better for him, yeah. But that's the thing, right? Okay, let's punish people for trying to make amends and like move forward to a more productive future. Right?
Certainly step one to redemption is acknowledging your wrongdoing, acknowledging the way in which it was bad, and, you know, apologizing to the relevant parties. That's something that both Kavanaugh and the Virginia governor have not done.
Right. So it's fundamentally different from those cases.
Yeah. Whether or not they are guilty of those things, they have not taken the first step towards, redeeming themselves. We can't say like, well, he's fine because if he did do it, he's a different personality. He would apologize for it if he did do it, but he didn't do it. Like you can't.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, it is different. But then in that case with Liam Neeson now, I would say we're in the opposite side of the spectrum, where in those cases, maybe they didn't do it, maybe they did, but we wouldn't expect them to apologize if they didn't do it. Yeah. And then in this case, it's like, we didn't even know anything happened at all until Liam Neeson voluntarily offered this up. Yeah, so he 100% did it, and he's 100% reformed, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like somebody, like there was a photo that was uncovered of him walking around with a baseball bat, like shouting to people, like caption at the bottom, Liam Neeson shouts about trying to hunt down black people, like,
right.
And then now he has to go and explain, his thought process and what happened and why he's a different person. No, like he just gave this information out,
right.
Voluntarily just said, this is the type of person that I used to be. How horrible is that?
Well, also, let's make a note. He did not attack anybody.
Yeah.
That's not what he said that. That's
certainly
what he
tried
felt,
to.
That's what he wanted to do. Right. And then also, I don't think we clarified this either. According to his story, of course, I mean, I don't know what he actually did, but according to his self-explanation, he wasn't like literally hunting down black people. He was hoping / expecting that somebody would attack him. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be, because he didn't want to be convicted for murder. He wanted it to be a self-defense thing. And at the time, it was pretty common for muggers in, I assume he was in like a sort of ghetto-like area in a city. And so it was more likely that if he was going to be attacked by a stranger on the street, that it would have been them. So I just want to clarify, he wasn't like going into people's homes and like trying to beat them up. He was hoping that he would get attacked and then he would be justified in killing that person in self-defense. He was baiting, basically. I mean, not to say I'm not justifying. I'm just saying it's a slightly different situation.
He was Zimmermaning.
He was Zimmermaning, exactly.
Yeah. So I don't have a ton more about that.
Well, do you have a personal opinion on it? Like, do you think that he should be, like, what do you think should be the proper response to this?
If anybody can be redeemed for anything, this is like the perfect case. He didn't actually follow through with doing anything terrible. All the boxes are checked here. He didn't follow through. It was like 30, 40 years ago. He's acknowledged the way in which it was terrible. And he gave up this information freely it wasn't like some PR thing, like the complete opposite. Like he volunteered this.
Well, also as in response to a fairly understandable circumstance, which is that his friend got raped. Yeah. I mean, not saying it's justified, but you could, I think a reasonable person could imagine themselves in that situation feeling a similar way.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know what we can. Who's a redeemable person? Like, what's like a more reasonable circumstance in which somebody could be redeemed? Like, if this isn't a perfect example, I don't know if redemption is a thing at all.
Well, you forgot to account for the fact that he is a cis white male, which because this is another thing where we had talked about, I think, in our episode 3 about Sarah Zhang. And how she had essentially tweeted out a bunch of very explicitly anti-white racist tweets and was known to do hashtags like #KillAllMen type stuff on Twitter. And the common left or progressive defense of that is people sometimes can feel like oppressed or wronged in some way, and we shouldn't judge the way that they react to this oppression. And so maybe she wasn't actually going to kill all men, but her anger against men is justified in this case because she has been like wronged by misogyny or
it's the way in which she talks about, like the language that she uses to speak about her oppressors.
Right, exactly. And I don't know if there was any flavor there about how if she had been previously molested or harassed or something in some way. But if she had been, I think that would be part of a justification. Like it's, if you, in principle, if you were a rape victim, it wouldn't be totally crazy to be tweeting about how you hate men or about how you're like cancel men or something. That's like, would be a reasonable reaction. Of course, if they did it, they should still go to jail, but you could at least have empathy for that. Right. And I think that is what, we should reasonably respect from a circumstance like this, where it's like, okay, I mean, thank God you didn't do it. Yeah. And you didn't succeed in baiting a black bastard and then killing him. And thank goodness that was something that, you regret from your youth, as people are wont to do. Like people, maybe not something this extreme, but people regret stuff from when they were young all the time. And I don't think that, to your point, or I agree with your take. I mean, we don't want to have a society where sort of the prototypical redemptive act is harshly punished by the culture, because then that gets us into kind of a dark place where just nobody will say anything. It's not that people won't be bad anymore, or won't ever have like dark thoughts. They'll just be super, super careful about ever telling it to anybody. That doesn't seem very healthy either.
Yeah.
Oh, Jeff Bezos. Oh my God.
Yeah. I read his Medium post. I thought, like that's funny. This is a thing that's happening now.
I mean, I didn't go that deep, but it is pretty funny. I mean, basically, if you're not aware of the story, there was a National Enquirer has been in this like weird blackmail holding pattern with Bezos for, I guess, a few months now, where
Jeff Bezos, the Amazon CEO.
The Amazon CEO who importantly owns the Washington Post. The original contention that started this entire tizzy was that the Washington Post was making certain claims. So somebody had reported about the National Enquirer and had said that they were variously in cahoots or like promoting messages from the like Saudi government after it was known that the Prince of Saudi Arabia murdered a journalist at the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Or there's this whole complex thing, but basically it resulted in this beef of, National Enquirer CEO versus Washington Post Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. And so the National Enquirer was sort of trying to tell Bezos, hey, can you guys back off from us? We'd really like to not be associated with, colluding with the Saudi government or something like that. And if you don't stop with this sort of messaging, by the way, we've like hacked your Apple Cloud or something.
Yeah.
And we've got a bunch of your dick pics.
Yeah.
And specifically, we've got these, whatever, your Snapchats that you were sharing with your mistress, was it Lisa Sanchez or Lauren Sanchez or something? And, and it's now also a big story that Bezos is divorcing with his wife, probably relating to him cheating on her or having a mistress. And so they essentially blackmailed him. They said, hey, be softer on our organization and we won't release your dick pics.
And if you read the emails from the National Enquirer, which were published by Jeff Bezos on his Medium post, it's kind of like they're kind of worded in this legalese type way where like they say we've acquired these specific photographs,
documents.
Yeah, these documents of a personal nature, quote, the dick pics or something.
Heretofore referred to as the
exactly.
dick pics.
So I don't know whether this is extortion or not, but shouldn't it be?
It sounds like it is. So just to wrap the story up, bring it to the present, it came out because Bezos published a Medium article where he said, I don't think anyone knew that this was happening. This was all behind the scenes, whatever, like Bezos' lawyers to the National Enquirer CEO's lawyers. And then so Bezos basically released the story by writing this Medium post where he shared all these screenshots of the emails with this guy or with this lawyer team or whoever it was, essentially, extorting him, threatening him. And he says, I'm not afraid of you guys. He didn't say this, but like, by the way, I'm the richest man on earth and in history. So maybe you don't want to mess with me. And this blackmail is not going to work. Of course, I don't want you to release these pictures, but I don't want you to have leverage over me. And I'm not going to stop the mission of the Washington Post to report the truth.
Yeah.
So, here's that out for the world. Now you guys know what's going on. You can see that the National Enquirer is essentially blackmailing / extorting me, and I'm not afraid, right?
Yeah.
And then really the only important thing that you have to know about this entire story. So the name of the publisher who is making this threat is David Pecker.
Yeah.
And so the Huffington Post headline after Jeff Bezos showed all this evidence was Bezos exposes Pecker. Which is one of the best headlines I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And then now no one is even talking about the actual like threat / extortion anymore because no one gave a shit about National Enquirer in the first place. Now it's just like, so are we going to see Jeff Bezos's dick?
Yeah.
There's like betting pools popping out, like prediction markets about the size of his dick. And
are we more likely to see Bezos or Trump's dick pic first?
Is someone extorting Trump for his dick pics?
Well, this has been going on for a while. The whole like P tape and all that stuff. Yeah, honestly,
we don't even know if that's real. We at least know we have some reason to believe that the dick pics are out there.
Yeah, I'm surprised that there haven't been any real like dick pics yet. at all, right? Like in the 10-ish years that Twitter's been around, we haven't seen any like besides Anthony Weiner, and even that was like how does this always happen, right?
So maybe it does happen, just the stories don't pick up steam because they're not funny enough.
Yeah. But even him, like his sext was like, you know, he was in tidy whities or something. We haven't seen like a full hog yet get posted on Twitter.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, obviously, you know, the prominent ones were from the fappening, right? So that was the first time this really happened, where there was a large number of celebrities where their nudes were all released at once, and pretty much everyone saw, well, not everyone, but a lot of people of the public saw them. And that was back in like 2014 or something. And yeah, for the most part, this hasn't happened. And even then, these were Hollywood celebrities for the most part, not really politicians.
Yeah, and it was just done like random, like there was no extortion involved. There was no like, I'm going to release your shit if you don't, you know, comply to my demands. I'm really honestly surprised that we haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, because you'd expect, you know, it's got to be out there somewhere, right?
I mean, yeah, like congressmen are getting caught like having sex with people in public toilets at airports and shit. Like this has been going on forever.
Right.
You know, they're getting into some stuff. I'm really surprised that we haven't seen any sexts or as many as we should.
I guess maybe they just know, okay, there's probably a couple things going on. One is, if they're in politics, they just know to be more careful than like people in Hollywood. Yeah,
or maybe Anthony Weiner was just like a really good warning shot. I mean, you would think he would be more careful.
Right, I know, seriously, that's hilarious. Yeah, so that could be part of it. Part of it is people in management or like CEOs or politicians are all older. So they're not like, they didn't grow up with taking dick pics. Like our generation, like right now, millennials, are really the first ones where we grew up with cameras in our pocket that we carry around with us, right? Yeah. So, you know, the dick pics are really the phenomenon of our generation. So I wouldn't be surprised if this does start happening all the time in like 20 years with people like me and you are the CEOs of big companies. Like right now, that's the really extreme exception with people like Mark Zuckerberg, even Jeff Bezos. I mean, he's like, what, 45 or something? Like he's not old, but he's young. He's older than...
Young enough to send a dick pic.
He's young enough to send a dick pic, but he's old enough that he didn't grow up with that sort of thing. Yeah. So it's not surprising that it took a little bit longer. But I do think that this is going to start being more normal. And so what a lot of people are saying online is like, well, maybe Bezos, maybe the best outcome of this is that the pic gets shared and everyone just gets super bored with it and no one cares, because we're going to have to get like culturally sensitized to this. At a certain point, it's very possible that everyone just starts having this shit online somewhere, you know, whether it was like a picture of them from college, like with this Virginia governor thing, where I assume it's way, way more common for people in our generation to have nude pictures of them from college somewhere than it is for them to have like blackface pictures, right? Yeah. Like maybe it's like 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a million people that have the random blackface Halloween costume pictures. Whereas nude pictures, it's gotta be like what, like 1 in 3 people more?
My very last Halloween that I actually dressed up for, I don't remember how old I was, like 14 or 15. I dressed up as an iPod commercial.
Oh.
So... Yeah.
Were you a white silhouette?
No, I was not a white silhouette. I'm really.
Do you have to censor this part of the podcast?
I'm really glad there's no photos of that. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I was super oblivious in high school, so I don't know what people thought. But yeah, this is my Liam Neeson story.
Oh God, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question just because, like, obviously, I think everyone sort of agrees that it's not a good idea to dress up in blackface ever. Mm-hmm. But to what you were doing, this is where the argument is, right? Like, it's not like you were, you know, you didn't have like this lip makeup and you were wearing like a bow tie and stuff. Yeah. Like, you were dressing up as a black silhouette.
Yeah,
like,
it had to be a turtleneck and black pants and white iPod earbuds prominently.
Right. And so that's like, okay, obviously you're not caricaturing a black person. Now you could say, well, you shouldn't do it anyway because it's close enough and you should just have the social awareness to not do that. Yeah. And that's fair enough. But like, I don't think you should get, if such a picture of you did exist, you shouldn't get pilloried for that. Your parents should have just said, oh, you know, maybe you shouldn't do that. Yeah. Or like your friends should have said, that's really funny, but like, we're not going to take a picture of that kind of thing. That's the question. It's sort of like, you know, we've talked on the program in the past about saying the N-word, where you're literally saying the N-word to describe what the word is, but you're not calling anybody that. Mm-hmm. So it's like, there's no like racial intent behind that. You're not mocking somebody. You're not trying to put them down. You're not trying to like you're not trying to weaponize it against like a marginalized population. You're just talking about the thing as it is, right? And so like, if you're putting on black paint to literally represent like a shadow, a silhouette, it doesn't really make sense to say, oh, you're a racist, because that's not, it's too divorced from the actual thing or from the like racial intent that the concept is associated.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the argument is that like some percentage of people see it as racist, and some percentage of those people like that it's racist. You're kind of reinforcing this like racist hegemony in the same way that you would if you're dressing up as like a Native American elder and you've got the feather hat and all that stuff.
Well, but that's the different circumstance. That would be more of the equivalent of blackface, where you're specifically trying to represent a certain people or culture.
But in both cases, you're just like, you're oblivious to any controversy surrounding it. Like you're totally ignorant to the harm that you might be causing. And yes, there's a degree of separation between the two cases, but
yeah. And I mean, the equivalent would be like if you want to dress up as a bird, so you put feathers on your body, and it's like, oh, that's, offensive to Native Americans.
And you think a bird sounds like, oh,
you're a turkey. I mean, anyway, that's the other thing that is kind of silly about all this stuff, where we can maybe all agree that certain Halloween costumes you shouldn't dress up as, but if there is like a consequence, a powerful negative consequence to racism, it's not really these microaggression-y type things of people dressing up in Halloween costume. It's like getting kicked out of a bar, or like having Liam Neeson chase you down and beat you up because you're the wrong race, right? Like those are the things we really want to avoid. And these types of like costumes, avoiding these types of costumes, it only matters as like a means to an end of abating the actual like violence or like not hiring someone because they're the wrong skin color or something like that.
And I mean, I think in most people's minds, like the response, like people know what the proper response is to those things. Like nobody thinks that a person who dresses up as a Native American in high school should be pilloried for the rest of their lives and, never be able to hold a job again and be banned from Twitter and all this stuff. Generally, I think people think that should be like, they should get a finger wag or two. And so 20,000 people finger wag at them on Twitter, and it turns into this whole other thing.
Right.
So we really just have to calibrate our response to these incidents. I think we have a pretty good idea generally about like what is and isn't allowed. And the problem is that social media just allows for massively asymmetrical responses to these problems.
Yeah, and this does tie in a little bit with like the Twitter thing where, like you said, okay, you're doing like a little finger wag, an individual person doing it might be appropriate at like a party. But then when you get diluted with these messages on social media and it turns into like a whole story and, suddenly this shows up when people Google search your name, that's where it gets to this like mass public shaming level that's not acceptable, right?
Yeah.
And then going back to our previous conversation, it's, to me, that's like super parallel or similar to the like learn to code thing, where it starts out as, it's just a meme that a few people think is pretty funny. It spreads and a bunch of people are doing it. And suddenly when you're a BuzzFeed writer and you have 20,000 people tweeting at you, learn to code, now it's moved from like a finger wagging or like a mocking sort of gesture, and now it's turned into harassment. That's like damaging your life, right? And so if that's the claim, then okay, if you're going to ban those learn to code people, should you ban the finger waggers or the public shamers as well? It seems like somewhat reasonable. I would personally not ban either, but I can understand how, like if you're trying to create a healthy public discourse, you probably don't want to encourage mass social shaming random people who just happened to commit some indiscretion 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, not that Liam Neeson is random, but this does happen to random people all the time.
Yeah.
Ron, what's his name? John Ronson. What a stupid name. John Ronson has a book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed. It came out a few years ago, so it's kind of in 2015. It's kind of a whistleblower on this sort of phenomenon. But it talks about this like public social shaming from saying something like a little bit awkward or wrong on social media, and how it can just like totally ruin a person's life and put them in the middle of like this massive, media spotlight for what years ago we would have just thought was like badly worded joke or like an off-color comment that you just make one time, and then suddenly the full force of the internet bears down upon you. Yeah, we still are kind of adapting to this new ecosystem.
Okay, do you want to spend a few minutes on the Green New Deal?
Yeah, we can do that. So Alexandria Occasional Cortex, which is my new favorite name for her. Where did this come from? There was it was because she has like a Netflix documentary coming out about her, and the Daily Wire tweeted saying like, send me your best titles for this, parody titles for this documentary about her. And one of them was like The Adventures of Occasional Cortex.
Yeah. That would be highly racist and offensive if your last name wasn't Quavas.
Quavas, yeah. Oh, yeah. Is this racist? That's not racist. It's just a pun. You can pun on anybody's name.
I know.
I should probably, pronounce it Hispanically or something like Ocasio Cortex. Okay, so what is the Green New Deal? Well, obviously, it's a reference to the New Deal, which is FDR's sort of massive public infrastructure / economic boosting program from the 30s. And that term has been dredged up again, but being spun with a climate flavor. And so the Green New Deal is something that it was originally coined, I guess, by the Green Party a few years ago, but didn't gain any steam. And then recently it's become part of the DSA platform embodied through Alexandria Ocasio Cortex. So AOC, I think it was back in December that she first brought this up. And there is this very rough outline in a Google document talking about what they want to achieve with this policy plan. It's kind of confusing because it claims that the purpose behind the policy is to sort of ratchet up the public conversation around climate change, because it's okay, climate change is happening, no one's taking any action, so all these lame duck politicians, and we need to do something radical if we're going to have any chance of stopping global warming. This is our existential threat. We need to take action in the next 10 years, and America has to be the leader in this space. So here's this radical progressive policy to reduce global emissions. So that's the headline. When you got into the text of it, it starts getting confusing because it's kind of just a mishmash, a combination of all of the things that the DSA wants to do. So it also includes stuff like free healthcare in it. It talks about housing, affordable housing, talks about it doesn't specifically reference UBI or universal basic income, but it hints at this idea of essentially an expanded welfare state for poor people.
Financial security for those unable or unwilling to work.
Yeah, we'll revisit that line in a little bit. But yeah, so it has a bunch of these sort of random or not related to climate social policies thrown into it. I guess that's the New Deal part of the green. But I think the overall narrative here is climate change is a big threat, and we have to have some sort of radical policy to stop it. And B, we also want to do all of these other super socialisty things as well, and let's just throw it into one big policy. So we'll stop climate change, and we'll stop poverty and crush inequality and smash the patriarchy kind of at the same time. Only recently, I think it was 2 days ago, this draft version was turned into the full text of a bill, or not really a bill. It's not legislation.
What is it? A proposition, or it's a
proclamation? No, it has a technical term.
Yeah.
The term is that it's a non-binding resolution. So it's not really it's not a policy that's being voted on, which it couldn't be because it's way too vague anyway. But it's it's more like a manifesto. It's this is a thing that we want to achieve.
Yeah, it's a signal to the rest of the world and to, our future politicians. And, this is the course that this particular section of our legislature wants to go.
Right. And so I think there's, This is blown up, one, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the new rising star of the Progressive Party, and she represents these progressive values that now all of the there's a question to what extent is it just her, or is this part of a larger mainstream view? But at the very least, there's some influence because all of the major Democratic 2020 presidential candidates have voice and opinion on it, mostly coming out in favor of it. So notably Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Bernie Sanders, Kirsten Gillibrand, that's pretty much the ticket. Those are the big players right now. They've all come out vocally supporting the Green New Deal at this point. Not just the draft, the actual resolution. I mean, I encourage everybody, if you actually care in any capacity at all, don't read only read opinion pieces as a secondary thing, but you should actually just go and read the source document.
It's not too difficult to get through. It's in relatively plain English because it's not literally legislature.
Right.
So it's pretty easy to read and kind of get the gist of what's going on. So do you want to talk a little bit about the kind of object level specifics of it?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I've noticed is that, well, as I mentioned, it's claims to be mostly about climate change, but in the actual meat of the resolution, at least half of it, maybe even more, is about other like socialist-y policies. And so it's definitely, if it was legislation, it would be like the definition of pork barrel. It like tries to slip in all this other shit into being about climate change. It's kind of trying to please these two different factions, where the one faction is people who are really concerned about climate change and just like are dying for some legislation that's addressing this, maybe as a counter to like Trump shooting down the Paris Climate Accord, for instance. And there's the other side, which is democratic socialist, who usually do care about climate change as well, or at least care to, but it seems as though they mostly just like the socialisty stuff that is being included in this, and they like this like overall vision for the future of American policy. So on the object level, the stuff that's included is the main target. This is the big bam. This is the selling point of the Green New Deal, is 100% renewable energy. So essentially they're trying to get by
2035, right? Or 2030?
It's 10 years. So 20, I guess implicitly 2030 would be 10 years. And
I have read that the previously like the most ambitious targets for 100% renewable is like 2050. Like that's like real soon is 2050.
Yeah. So that's in like California.
Yeah. So 2030 is quite ambitious.
Yeah. 2030. I mean, that's the reaction to this is just completely ridiculous. It's not even like vaguely possible. Yeah. There's no way it's going to happen. And furthermore, it's not like I think the document itself kind of doesn't make the strong distinction between zero emissions versus 100% renewable energy sources. Because you could have, solar power plants everywhere, and that's where all of your like electricity is coming from. But you can't have zero emissions because you have to emit some carbon through just like existing as humans. Like even if, part of the document stresses the importance of like sustainable agriculture or like farming practices, like transportation sources, but you can't actually get to zero. It's not possible. And I think they understand that like on an intellectual level, but the resolution doesn't make it doesn't acknowledge this. It kind of pretends as though this is possible. And so one of the examples it gives is it sort of has this bulleted list of things that we have to do. So one is stop all fossil fuels immediately. So like no oil, no gas, no natural gas, no coal. That's just done. Stuff like planes now can't really be a thing. So one of the claims of the document is you don't really need planes anymore because you could have like electric high-speed rails going everywhere in the United States, which if you know anything about the California high-speed rail, 2030 it doesn't make any sense as a goal. It wants all of agriculture and transportation in general to get to zero emissions as well. So that means 100% electric powered car fleet and all of the energy to support this.
Does it? You're using the phrase zero emissions.
Sorry, I mean 100% renewable sources.
Okay.
But this is part of what I'm saying is that the document it's not totally clear on what the real target here is. Because and then one of the points is about agriculture and like sustainable farming practices and how we want to bring everything to be like locally sourced or produced or something, which doesn't totally, again, that doesn't really acknowledge that there's economies of scale that could reduce emissions, but this is part of the goal. Anyway, you could go on about this, but the point is it wants to essentially completely transform the American economy such that there are no fossil fuels are not part of the picture anymore.
Yeah, notably, before we get off of the energy side of this, it also wants to transition away from nuclear. Can we talk about nuclear for like 2 seconds?
Yes.
So this drives me nuts.
It has driven a lot of people nuts.
As like somebody on like the left end of the spectrum, especially when it comes to environmental issues, both of us obviously acknowledge the existence of anthropogenic climate change. I think we both can safely say that we think it's going to be a problem and there should be something done about it. The question is kind of like, what is the most efficient and intelligent way to solve this problem? From the minimal amount that I've looked into it, it seems like carbon tax and nuclear are like the two untapped places that we can get a lot of value from. And like everybody I tell this specific fact to, it like blows their mind. Do you know how much of our total energy we get from nuclear right now, having not built any nuclear power plants in like the last 30, 40, 50 years, something like that? We built like one or two in the last 5 decades.
So you're saying how much of U.S. energy is produced by nuclear?
Yeah, what percentage?
I would have to guess like 1%.
It's 20%.
Really?
20% of our electric energy comes from nuclear power plants when we have not built one in like literally decades.
Oh, so that's percentage of electric energy or all energy?
I would have to double check. But
okay,
like,
but that's like the grid. That's
if you're talking about oil, natural gas, coal, all of these things, nuclear makes up 20%.
That is way higher than I thought.
Yeah. And, there's obviously some problems. Like
it's kind of embarrassing because I was in the solar industry, so I should probably know these things.
Every time one of these things like Fukushima or Chernobyl or like 3 Mile Island, like people get scared off of it. But like we've been having these things running for decades and there's been no problems. There's issues with the supply of uranium at the current level of usage. Our uranium supply will run out in like 200 something years. If we keep building more, it'll last like probably 50 to 100 years. But, there's thorium reactors that, those supplies will last probably hundreds of years. We just need something to transition us off of these fossil fuels until we can get some kind of other future energy source going. And it's mind-blowing to me that we haven't figured this nuclear thing out. Okay, another mind-blowing fact. How much space do you think the nuclear waste, all the nuclear waste that's ever been produced in the United States, how much space do you think that takes up? If we stacked it all up in one spot, you think it would take up...
don't anchor me. Don't anchor me. I'll try and guess. Well, I know that's not going to be very much, so I know a little bit more about that. I would guess it's something like a square mile or like a square kilometer of area or something like that.
So my source here is a Forbes article, but I haven't read this in a little while. So I think... without looking it up, if you stacked it all the nuclear waste that's ever been produced in the United States from nuclear power plants, if you stacked it all on a football field, it would go 50 feet high.
Okay. So it's less than a square mile. That's like maybe, or like a cube, or it's like a cubed, maybe like a cubed half a kilometer or something like that.
Yeah, 100 yards times, I don't know.
So that's like in the ground in Nevada right now or something, or where does this actually go?
It's in a bunch of different places now, but we have this caved out mountain in Nevada that was supposed to be the home for it for a while, but we just haven't been building these things because of 3 Mile Island.
Right.
And yeah, it really drives me crazy because this feels like the solution and it's just staring us in the face. And with this and a carbon tax, honestly, I feel like 2050 is feasible.
Right. So bring that back to the Green New Deal. There's
Do you have more to say about the energy side of it? I'm done with my nuclear rant.
Yeah, sure.
Go back.
Yeah, well, so here's the problem that I have with it is it claims we can just focus on the green part for now. We already understand in some sense the socialistiness of the DSA and Ocasio-Cortez in particular. But just focusing on the green end, yeah. So, well, first of all these other infrastructure ideas are like, as you mentioned, we're people that do care about climate change. Like I'm practically a vegan. I started transitioning towards that because I was worried about the climate change impacts of meat eating. I worked in the solar industry for several years, again, only because I was concerned about, I was invested in renewable energy and alternative energy. But I acknowledge it, as you're saying too, there's ideas out there that actually are pretty good. Like there's technology that we can invest in. There's different types of energy sources. There's policy solutions, like ways to change incentive structures. The frustrating thing about this Green New Deal is it basically draws a box around all the ideas that anyone's ever had that are actually good, and then just throws them out and says, by the way, we're not going to consider, here's our like extremely ambitious goals that are essentially impossible to achieve. Here's all the best ideas for achieving them. And we're not going to use them. Yeah. Like that. It's too, it's too centrist. It's like too much of a good idea that we won't even consider.
It really almost feels like it's like a collection of the ideas that sound the best to like the most, HuffPost Vox plugged in type person. Like it's the most raw, ambitious sounding ideas and not necessarily the most like the ones that everybody on both sides kind of agrees is the best way to go.
Right. And so here's where, okay, now we can bring up the sort of socialisty elements to it. So it takes ideas that sound good to people who are in the space, like nuclear power, like carbon taxes, like cap and trade emissions, like, buying and selling carbon credits, like offset credits, storage, like carbon capture and storage. So there's all these different types of solutions that people in the space have come up with. And the Green New Deal proposal just says we are not going to consider those things. Like, it explicitly has a bunch of these ideas that says we're either not going to consider it, or if we do, it'll be like a really small portion and it won't be a priority.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating. And, a lot of us who are invested in the, renewable energy industry or like sustainability might ask why do they leave these things out? And luckily the document explains it. And then this is where we get into the socialistiness of it, which is it claims to have a problem with any idea that can basically make somebody money, or that like requires market incentives or market like processes to work. And instead it has this vaguely articulated concept of, if there's more power in the hands of like random citizens, then that's what's sufficient to stop climate change. So like one of the solutions to agriculture is everybody has their own like local gardens, like community, like farms or something. And like carbon tax, investments or like subsidies for renewable technologies are not necessarily the best way to go, because that can just put more power in the hands of like capitalists who are trying to, invest in solar power or something like that. Instead, what we need is these like large public works projects, and we need to like tax a bunch of the rich people, to make sure that the poor are not disenfranchised by this project. We need to implement these other socialist policies at the same time. I guess the steelman of this argument is, in the pursuit of reducing emissions, we have to make sure that we're not disenfranchising the poor or like the working class.
It's literally environmental intersectionality is what it is.
Yeah. I guess that's a good way of putting it. So like an example of how this could happen is in France, they had recently implemented something like a carbon tax where I think it was a very high gas tax. And the idea is this is a regressive tax, because the people that pay a larger share of their incomes towards gas are poor working class people. Rich people don't have to worry about it because that's a small percentage of their consumption relative to their income. And so there was a bunch of protests about this, and this was big news like over the summer, where these yellow vests, who is like a kind of an activist group, is worried that these elites, like globalist elites, are instituting this regressive, essentially a carbon tax that's hurting them the most. And I think this is a response to that, where they're trying to bake into this Green New Deal, oh, don't worry, yeah, we are going to stop climate change with these like extremely radical, pretty much completely unrealistic infrastructure projects and like energy targets, but this totally isn't going to affect poor people at all. In fact, at the same time, we'll also just stop poverty with these policies. And so when they ask, okay, how are you going to pay to and then, sorry, just one more thing with regard to one of their bullet points for green policy. They want to retrofit literally every building in the United States to have energy efficient, like appliances, or like have solar panels, or like not.
Yeah, the document literally says like rebuild or restructure all buildings or something.
Right, literally all buildings. And so it's like, okay, you're going to retrofit every building in the United States. You're going to completely stop all fossil fuels. You're going to create like a massive interstate high-speed rail electric something. You're not going to use nuclear power for any of it. I guess it's all going to come from solar and wind somehow, which doesn't make any sense. You're not going to use any carbon capture and storage or any carbon taxes. And you're also going to implement free healthcare. Again, this is like part of the resolution is free healthcare, like affordable housing or free housing, free college tuition for everybody, because that's something we should just generally have. And then also, this quote that you had brought up earlier, provide like government security, ensure, what is it? It's like promise government security to those who are unable or, underline, bold, italicize, unwilling to work. It calls in this proposal to grant subsidies to people who just don't want to work. Like, they're not disabled or anything. They just are lazy. I don't know. It's not clear. I think it's been since clarified that they didn't really mean that, or like it was like on a frequently asked questions page that's been since taken down. But there is, public record of this being part of the idea.
Yeah, that was in the document that I read.
Yeah. It was in an actual document. And then so there's these super extremely ambitious goals, which may not even be possible or make any coherent sense. And of course, they would be incredibly expensive if you're going to try and pay for it. And so then the question is, and then added on all of these socialistic type policies, which each one of them would be be more expensive than any policy that's ever been passed in United States history. And then when asked, like, how are you going to pay for this? Like, what's the plan? Like, okay, are you going to tax people? Are you going to like issue a bunch of bonds? How are you going to do this? And then the answer is, we're just going to print the money.
Yeah.
It's just going to work. Like, trust us, like, read these papers about how money works. And it turns out that, you know, the economists ran the numbers and you can just print as much money as you want and the problem solved.
Yeah. The tweet that I saw, I don't remember who that was. I sent this to you. God, it was either a journalist or something.
Yeah. No. It was like the chief economist of I'll just find it. Her.
Stephanie Kelton.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Stephanie Kelton tweeted.
Let me just find the actual tweet.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then so one of these I'm reading in one of her tweets, one of the core in one of the core parts of the resolution. Everyone who wants a job is guaranteed the right to employment at a living wage. So it's a jobs guarantee, like literally everyone can have a job. And I believe they also stipulate that a living wage is something like $15 an hour. So it's like we're going to take the minimum wage question and then say not only are we going to make this a federal thing at the target that we want to set, which is like a super, super high minimum wage, we're also going to guarantee that job to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So Stephanie Kelton, what's her job title again?
So she is Stephanie Kelton, at Stephanie Kelton on Twitter, professor of economics and public policy at Stony Brook University, was chief economist for the Democrats on U.S. Senate Budget Committee.
Okay. So she has a whole thread where she explains the financial strategy for this deal, like
a generous word.
Yeah. the way that she intends or the way that she explains where the money will come from to pay for this.
Right.
And there's one in particular.
This is the start of the thread. It says, question.
Yeah, that's the one that I like.
Yeah, so this is her tweet to start this thread. Question, can we afford a hashtag Green New Deal? Answer, yes. The federal government can afford to buy whatever is for sale in its own currency. And then this is based on this idea, which is sort of justified in the economic policy world and is called modern monetary theory. And you can try and understand it. It's kind of like a high-minded academic speak type thing, so it's hard to really read the literature. But the output of the theory, the way it's used, is to say you can literally print as much money as you want to do whatever you want as the government.
I mean, it's like it's up to a certain point, right? Like, I think the argument is like the amount of money that we can print and the amount of things that the government can buy is capped, but it's capped at a way higher level than we should expect it to be capped.
Right.
Like our deficit is something like what, 10, 12, 15 trillion, something like that. And it could be probably 100 trillion according to these economists.
Right. So I think what idea in principle that is right. And I think a lot of people kind of just ignore it or don't really care. But the fundamental theory behind that is, okay, you know, we all understand money represents it's a proxy for value. It's something that people care about, right? And so the money of a country that it's printing has to do with, you know, it represents the value being generated by the people in that country, essentially. And so by printing money, there's a couple possible scenarios. One possible scenario is you just print a bunch of money and then burn it. And that, essentially devalues the current currency that's out there. So that's sort of the extreme, is literally just print money and then burn it. Now, if you print twice as much money as there exists, then you could say that, you know, each person's dollar is now worth half as much or something like that. Well, I guess if you burned all of it, then the money would be worth the same because there's the same amount in circulation. But say you just gave equally exactly as much money everybody has, you just double everyone's money in the US instantly, then it doesn't, the money doesn't actually double in value.
Yeah, you're paying $6 for your coffee instead of $3, but like you're being paid twice as much too. So.
Right. So it's just pure inflation. So that's one extreme end. The other end is like, maybe there's a bunch of valuable work that has to be done or that people want done. And if that work or that value can be captured through the federal government, then it's okay for the government to print that money to do that thing. Mm-hmm. And so if something needs to be done, such as like, I don't know, the Green New Deal or building a wall or whatever the government is spending money on, that can be justified through this theory that says there's sort of like a latent economic capacity that can be tapped into, and individual market participants can't do it, but the US federal government can. Yeah. So it's spending money. It's not just pure inflation. It's actually going to something valuable. So it's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I know that this is like a 140 character tweet, it's hard to like really break down, exactly what this economist thinks. But is it literally true, this tweet that we just read? Yes, the federal government can afford to buy whatever is for sale in its own currency. Is that a literally true statement?
No.
I
mean, it doesn't. I mean, you could get into the metaphysics of it, but it doesn't.
Like if I clip my toenails and put them on eBay for $300 trillion, can the federal government afford to buy that collection of toenail clippings?
Yeah, so the example, there's people have been commenting about this all over the place, and a popular conservative parody of this is to say, question, can you microwave a fork? Answer, yes. If you put a fork in the microwave and press start, it will run.
I like the poison one better, though. Can you drink poison? Answer, well, you have a working esophagus and your mouth will put the poison down into your stomach. So yes, you can drink poison.
Right.
My only problem with the microwave one is you actually can microwave a fork and nothing happens. You don't,
really?
Yeah, you don't want to microwave foil because foil will catch on fire. But like forks and knives and like solid metal things, they'll just get a little hot. They won't ruin the microwave.
Oh, well, TIL.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe that's not a good analogy, but yeah, that's the thing is like, okay, it can afford to buy it, but what does afford mean? Okay, it can do it. Kind of, it can, it technically can, but then the consequences are potentially disastrous.
But now the richest person in your country has $300 trillion and they have more money than the federal government does, all because you bought their toenails. It doesn't.
Great example. So that's the thing is, of course, in the worst case, if, there's one extreme example where you just print as much money as everybody has, you don't actually do anything useful with it, and then it's just deflated the value of their currency. And then you get situations like Zimbabwe, where people are rolling around carts just filled with, reams of $100 bills because it's not worth anything. They just need to buy a coffee.
People are stealing baskets full of money and leaving the money.
Right. And then you've got the other scenario where you're actually paying for something valuable and it's just not something that the market sort of bears at the moment. I guess it's fine, or it's understood to be fine, or okay, maybe there'll be some inflation, but it's not that much, and it ends up being worth it for the cause or something, right? And so that's kind of that's the implicit claim that these people are making. But the problem is they're framing it in this way that you literally can just spend money to pay for anything. There's no consequences. Yeah. It's not like there's consequences, but it's worth it, or it's a trade-off. Or
they're not even saying. Yeah, they're not even saying where the line is. How much can we pay for? Is there anything the federal government can't pay for? Yeah, there's no line here. So they're just saying, well, yeah, we can pay for anything. We can do whatever we want.
Yeah. Here's her immediate follow-up tweet in her own thread to this thing is, question, are you saying that the government can just, quote, print the money to pay for new spending? Answer, is there any other way?
There's a few.
What are taxes?
There's a few ways.
What are regulations? Oh, then she answers her own question. Question, is there another way? Yes, you can raise taxes. Answer, that's not how it works. Taxes remove some of the money the government spends into the economy. You could spend and tax the same amount, but the government normally spends more than it taxes so that the economy can keep the extra dollars. So there's this whole thread that kind of gets more wonky and economic-y and tries to justify her stance here. And the Green New Deal policy is included in the resolution. But I think if you go too deep into the justifications, you kind of lose sight of the point, which is that this clearly doesn't make any sense, on an intuitive level. And people are sort of smelling the bullshit and saying, we still do actually have to pay for this, whether we're literally paying for it or we're paying for it in terms of deflation in our, current capital, income or our cash reserves or something. It's being paid for somehow.
I guess there's a steel man for the document itself, which is, yes, it's ultra ambitious, maybe impossibly ambitious, but maybe because it's a non-binding resolution, it has to be a certain level of ambitious such that the resulting actual legislation actually does something. Sort of like the Overton window principle. If you want to talk about X thing in our current politics, but it's nobody wants to talk about that because everybody thinks it's offensive or something like that. You just say something that's 10 times more offensive than X, and then suddenly X doesn't look so bad.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe that's what's going on here. My problem with it is it's ambitious in the totally wrong direction. I wish it was ambitious about, the actual intelligent solutions and not these like ridiculous pipe dream solutions.
Yeah, and I think it's, so I'm doing some like job negotiation stuff right now, and if you've ever done a salary negotiation, or not even that, even just like haggling, but I'll use this as an example. People often say like, yeah, you should ask high, right? So maybe you think that your real value is whatever, $70,000. That's what you think your salary should be, and then somebody, maybe the company who you're interviewing with, they offer you 60,000, and then you're like, okay, if you then ask for 70,000, maybe that's what you're really worth. But then if they're okay with paying it, then they'll just give you that. You want to ask for more than what you think you're worth a little bit, and then you'll get somewhere, and they're going to offer you less, and you'll get somewhere in the middle. This is how negotiation works. It's how it's worked everywhere throughout history forever. This is like, this is just what happens. And so if you're going to ask for, if it's on you to give a counter offer and you think your value is 70, then you might say, no, but I would really like 80, or like, you might soften up and say, I'm talking to a few other people right now. I'd really love this opportunity, but, I'm not sure that I could support my family. I'd really like 80,000 instead of 60,000. And then maybe you eventually you play this sort of cat and mouse game and you settle at 70, and that wouldn't have happened if you didn't ask for 80, right? Yeah. And maybe they just give it to you. Maybe that, maybe you're successful in your negotiation. So I think that the Green New Deal guys, that steel man that you suppose, where they're just asking for something high and hoping that they, shift this a little bit. I think that's what they think they're doing.
What they're actually doing is they're asking for $8 billion.
Right. They're like, I'd like $1 million. And the person on the other side of the line said, wait, are you serious?
Yeah.
And then they hang up the phone.
You don't get a second interview when you ask for $1 million.
Right, exactly. And it's like you have to have a little bit of finesse here, right? You have to like understand what you're asking for. And then the other thing is they don't even say that's what they're doing. That's the steel man. But then if you ask them like, wait, are you serious about that million? And they're not just a bad negotiator. They'll say, oh yeah, no, I actually think I'm worth $1 million. Yeah. Like that's what I want you to pay me. And they keep getting hung up on and being like, why won't anybody pay me $1 million?
Don't you care about climate change or the extermination of the human race?
Yeah, exactly.
Give me my $1 million.
Yeah. And then that's, there's this bait and switch where they say, if pressed on this, they say, well, this is like going to the moon, or it's like fighting the Nazis in World War II. It seemed like it was like the Manhattan Project, creating the atomic bomb. It seems like this project that's impossible, but gosh darn it, we're Americans and we have drive and passion, and we have to set these big ambitious goals. And only if you believe it, can you achieve it, right? And so there's all this like cheerleading around it, like, this is part of the American spirit to set these high goals and then try to set this moonshot, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, then they try to evoke the spirit, but at the same time, if climate change is an existential threat and they have to like believe it to achieve it, to find a solution, why are you including all this other random bullshit that has nothing to do with climate change in this legislation? Like if it was necessary, like an asteroid's coming to hit us quick, we have to get a living wage for everybody so that we can fight this asteroid. It's like, we got like 5 days. Yeah. Should we send maybe like NASA at it? Should we like use the best of our technology? Should we get like a group of really smart experts, policy experts, to figure out what's the best way to do this? No, let's start a public bank and empower people of color in our local communities. Yeah. Like, okay, fine, but then you can't. Maybe that's what you want to do, but then you can't talk at the same time about this. Like, we only have 10 years to
solve this existential threat. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what's so frustrating about it. So prepare to keep hearing this over and over again, because I have a feeling this idea, if this idea has succeeded at all, it succeeded in just rousing public ire about it, where we haven't dipped into the meta commentary, but basically there's 3 stances on this. All Republicans saying this is completely stupid and idiotic, and this is how socialism is going to invade U.S. politics. There's the far left, which is saying, no, we have to do this. It's like totally necessary, and AOC is our queen, and it's so amazing that finally we've got a vision for the future. And then there's center leftists who are like, it's not that bad. There's some good ideas and some bad ideas, but I think it's on the right track. And that's pretty much the responses that I've seen. Yeah. And I would really like those center leftists to point it out for what it is and say, this is a joke. We need something more reasonable if we're going to take this, what you say is a threat, seriously. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I want to be about it.
Yeah. Okay. Agreed. I think we're about done.
Well, this Green New Deal story, it kind of just came up in the last couple of days, so we felt like we needed to cover it. Like I said, though, you're probably going to hear it a bunch. Just jump on Twitter, and I'm sure it's going to be part of the public conversation next to Medicare for all, running up to the 2020 elections.
Yeah.
Especially since all these presidential candidates have sort of staked out a claim on it.
We didn't talk about this Marie Kondo nonsense, but I'm already over that story.
Just watch Tidying Up. It's great.
Yeah.
Showed you that the manga,
it's super good.
Life-changing manga of Tidying Up. Marie Kondo recently made an actual, she actually wrote this manga.
She wrote it?
Yeah, she wrote
That's crazy.
Yeah. I skimmed through it. I don't know if it's my style. I like the documentary version more, or the what's it called, reality TV show more. But that is a great show. Okay, so what do we get out of this episode? Watch Marie Kondo. Keep on the lookout for Jeff Bezos' dick pics.
Yeah.
Read the Green New Deal document. I think everyone should read the source material. And obviously follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Reddit.
At @grokkingpoints on Twitter.
r/grokkingpoints on Reddit. We're on Spotify now because Spotify does this apparently. They added our podcast without even...
They didn't even ask. They just put up 1 billion podcasts on Spotify. So that's sick. So if you have a Spotify subscription, then check us out there. Buckle up your seatbelts. 2019 is going to be quite a ride, I think.
Yep. All right.
Outro. We really need an actual outro instead of just saying outro.
I like the flavor of Coke Zero.
Yeah,
It's not too sweet for me.
Yeah, I like the flavor of it better than Diet Coke, but I wouldn't say I mind either of them. In general, I don't like sugar a lot, so any the croix is what I go for.